is that I've been at Microsoft 16 years. I worked on a bunch of things. I was project manager for Windows 2000, which alone means that I have to atone for a bunch of sins for many, many years. The classic one there being NIMDA. Okay, so NIMDA was this thing. You got to remember, Windows 2000 was all about 1999. We were all drinking Internet 1.0 Kool-Aid. You know, we're all going to be rich. We're all going to help the internet developer. So we did stupid things. We turned everything on by default. And hi, David LeBlanc, who's a man that's coming up next, and he's a very good speaker, so I'd suggest you hang around for David to talk. But in Windows 2000, we did things like we turned on the internet printing server on every Windows Server system. Now, since August 2000, when a little thing called NIMDA came out, you know, I've spoken to probably about 2,000 customers, and in that time I've found 2 that ever put internet printing in production. Everybody was vulnerable. About, you know, less than a very small percentage were the people that actually ever used it. One of those was Arthur Anderson, so therefore they can't really be valid. I also was the project director for Windows XP. I started atoning for some of my security sins with Windows Server 2003, which was our first release where we did what's called the security development lifecycle. And if you don't know what that is, that's what we do to actually try and develop secure software. I think that everybody in the biz these days will agree that Microsoft has made some significant leaps over the last couple of years. Hopefully you don't disagree with me there. I think you should agree with me. If you want to know more about SDL, check out the book that David LeBlanc and Mike Howard wrote. Check out Mike Howard's blog. There's a bunch of stuff that goes on there. So today, I'm going to talk about a bunch of stuff we're doing in the next release of Windows Server, which is called Windows Server 2008. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've gone to look in the system, how we've changed our engineering process, how we've been able to update the SDL and be able to go and do things, our process to go and find things that we think would be vulnerable. Then I'm going to talk about a version of the system, or an installation option called Windows Server Core, which is our really cut down version of Windows, and our learnings around some of the things that came up there. And then I'll talk about some of the stuff we've got to go and do. Okay? So there you go. There's my little summary. As you can tell, I'm really fancy on PowerPoint, and I'm really good at doing drawings as well. So the first thing that we had a big realization around Windows Server 2003, and specifically when we released SP1 and we did this thing called the security something wizard, security configuration wizard, which after installing everything you get to run this wizard and it'll turn off all the ports. That was kind of the dumb way of going and looking at things. The smart way is actually go and install it and make sure there's nothing open. And there's nothing open by default. So in Windows Server 2008, there is nothing turned on by default. You go and poke that thing from the net and you're going to have a really boring time because all you're going to be doing is poking holes and you're not going to find anything. Sorry about that if the people who really want to go and do things. By the way, I've got my flashy Andrew Cushme helped me with this because he's much better at PowerPoint than me, but I've got my flashy little thing that I do, which kind of could symbolize a target, but it's not intended to go and do that. So, you know, one of the things that we also looked at is, besides having this outer ring that is always protecting the system, you go and say that there are none of the extra services going and turned on by default. You know, if you want, for some reason, like me, because I run server on my laptop, I want to run the ATI driver, which is relevant for there, I got to go and find that thing. None of that stuff is there. Sorry about that. It doesn't make it simpler. It makes it harder. But oddly enough, I think most people run their servers in a black room and they don't really care about having this high-end video driver on their system. So we turn everything off. When you do things like join a domain, join a Windows Active Directory domain, you're going to turn on a bunch of extra services because there's more stuff that's there. That will open up some interfaces, but really our job is to be able to protect those interfaces and make sure that they're not open. The firewall is turned on by default. That is the Vista firewall. All our inbox stuff that we've shipped it goes and plumbs the firewall. We've documented how for application vendors how to plumb the firewall. You got to do that with your application install. Sorry, it's the way it is. You got to do a harder piece of work. Sorry about that. That's life wasn't meant to be easy, as someone in Australia once said. I have this croaky voice, which someone told me before was a Las Vegas accent. But we won't go into the reasons for that. But yeah. So one of the other things is, server is not installed to go and do things like play a game. Okay, server is there to go and provide infrastructure support, to provide stuff for your network, stuff for your infrastructure. So we have on top of that, we have the idea of roles, whether that's an Active Directory role or a web server role or a DHCP DNS server role, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of them that come along there. Whenever they get installed, they've got to go and plumb the firewall to be able to go and expose the ports and expose the protocols that they actually ship across the wire. The real rule that we tried, and I think we've succeeded this time, is that every time you got to have a really low attack surface. You got to have no attack surface to start with, and then when you install a thing, you want to be able to go and do that. And we go and do things like, we improved the stuff that we do to go and do the /GS switch when we compile stuff, so that you're going to have some automatic protection for buffer overflows. We've got to be able to go and do that because we make the thing that's generic, and oddly enough, the experience that's probably in this room is not very common in corporate America. People turn on their systems. We've got to be able to protect them by default. It makes it harder for the people that are the super high-end people, but we figure that they can work out ways to be able to go and automate their systems. We've built in a bunch of stuff around heat protection and doing things like NX and working with the processors to be able to go and do some lower-level protection. Last year at Black Hat, there was a talk about ASLR. Doesn't roll off the tongue all that well, but ASLR is allowing for any time you reboot the system, you're going to be automatically able to move stuff around where they load in memory, so that someone goes and finds a vulnerability or finds a vector to be able to go into the system. They're not going to always be able to go and get to offset X to be able to go and find the kernel and be able to go and do code insertion in that. So every time the system's rebooted, the kernel's loaded to a different place. Different parts of the system are loaded to different places. Building in protection of the system and be able to go and say that there are layers to be able to go and do that. We've also gone and put in BitLocker for data drives. Oddly enough, you got BitLocker on Vista. The right thing to go and do is to go and protect your system drive, because if someone lifts your laptop, and maybe you or I would go and want to go and set it on data drives and go and set it up that way. The right thing is to go and turn it on for the whole system for the Vista type user. For servers, you don't really care about the system partition that much. You really care about where your data is, and you really want to be able to go and protect that. The other thing that I'm going to talk a little bit later is about Windows Server Core. We've also gone and built in a bunch of protection through what we've done in engineering the product. And frankly, I would strongly recommend, if you're developing, especially if you're developing system-level type software, to make sure your teams grok the idea of how they're going to be able to build secure software from day one. If you don't have that as your check-in gates, if you don't have that as protection to your systems, you're making mistakes. I go and have a look at, the latest versions of things like Visual Studio, and I'm like, kids these days, they get given every free thing in the world to be able to go and work out when they have a problem in the system. But the reality is that, that allows for you to be able to detect when there is problems in your code, and be able to go and show up when you've got a BO in your system. And you really want to be able to go and do that. And you want to train your developers, the people who are writing, your software is as secure as your end user, your end developer. Okay, you can go and build in protections. We've built in multiple levels of protections. We go and run tools across our software before anybody goes and checks in. But it all comes down to the mindset of the end developer or the end designer of the software. And we've been really going and working about raising that with the developers in Microsoft. Hopefully you're seeing that with the sort of people that you meet at this conference. We've also built a lot of fuzzing tools, and we've been fuzzing any of the protocols that are opened up to the world. and going and having a look at the things that, you know, when you have a sort of vector that's a little bit different on a protocol, what you can go and do. And finally, the obvious thing that we've got to go and do is we've got to go and do a bunch of reviews. The market, I will admit here right now, the marketing, actually it wasn't even the marketing guys. One of the program managers in the security team drew a slide that had all these nice PowerPoint pretty boxes and stuff, and I just thought it was lame, so I drew it on my whiteboard and took a photo, and that's what I put in my slide. So there you go. This is true using PowerPoint the correct way. What do we do for our process? So you've probably got some people, there's probably some people here, actually I know there's some people here who have been part of the team that have been going and checking for things on the system, going and working for the last couple of months to go and work with us to do various levels of checking into the system, whether it's code reviews, design reviews, all that sort of stuff. I think that officially they call Black Hat their ship party, so we'll all crawl inside a gin bottle tonight and have a good time. What we did to go and have a look at the system is that we looked at the stuff that really gets exposed. Okay, we had a look at the stuff that's going to get exposed out to the net, going to get exposed out to broader parts of systems. We went through selecting those. We did a base level set of code analysis around that, a set of design questions, and that really led us to go and say, you know, there's some stuff that's high risk. Okay, there's going to be some stuff that's low risk, and there's going to be some stuff that you don't really care about on server. You know, you get on Vista, you know, you get all that cool whoop-de-woo stuff where all the windows go and do all that sort of stuff, and, you know, if you're on Linux, you can go and do the whole cube thing and all that sort of stuff. I write server software. I don't care about that crap. Okay? I care about the ways that our customers are going to expose their systems to the net. I care about being able to go and easily or help them protect those systems by default. So we went through a process where we go and do a bunch of design reviews around the software. We then go and do a bunch of code reviews and go and find out where there might be some problems that are coming along. And we do a deeper level of protocol fuzzing. Because you know these things, if they're going to sit on the net, if they're going to be a DNS server that's sitting on the net, they're going to get attacked. You know, if they're a web server, they're going to get attacked. You know, so especially if you have a web server that's running, say, Microsoft.com, you know it's going to get attacked. It's going to get attacked by people in this room probably, but it's going to get attacked. For all the other stuff, we've got all this sort of standardized ways of going and looking at the system. We've got our core SDL practices, and as I've said, the book is actually a pretty good book. Mike Howard's blog is a pretty good place. I don't know if you've got a blog, David, but... No, you don't? Okay, David LeBlanc has a great blog. I've never read it. But he's got a bitchin' haircut, yeah. You can see that guy driving a Camaro any day of the week. And then we have a bunch of... come on, okay. I'm ragging on the guy. You're going to laugh. And then we have a bunch of centralized tool runs that we go and run across the system. As I said before, if you've got to go and do a check into our system, your code is going to get analysed to see whether there are things that either we're going to talk about here that we've detected previously, you're falling into patterns that aren't particularly good, and we're going to flag it, and we're going to go and, before it gets checked into the source base and gets built, we're going to go and flag it and make sure that we go and do another round of review and sit down and talk to the developer about it. This, we think, is the model for us to continue going and building software. You know, when we went into in 2002, when we first created the SDL, and all the stuff that we went through and all the hell that we went through to go and do that, because, you know, like, SDL didn't come from nowhere. You know, we released XP, we were all proud of our little baby, and then a month and a half later a vulnerability came up, I think in UDDI or something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but that was a really sort of shocking thing for us, that immediately this thing's been compromised. Admittedly, it wasn't a protocol no one cared about, but we won't go into that. And so, you know, like, this is the continuation. I believe for Microsoft, it's at least another 5 years before we can go and say, out of the box, every system that we go and do, you know, we're not going to be worried about for the first 6 months what sort of vulnerabilities come up. I believe that. we're going to see what happens. Also, the industry is changing pretty radically. The models where, you go and say there are cloud services interacting with in-premise services is going to probably make a sort of change the sort of attack vectors that people go and have with their systems. So I'm going to talk about Windows Server Core, then I'll talk about, I think, what we've got left to do, and then I'll get out of your way by about 4:05, I promise. There you go. Hands up if you've heard of Windows Server Core. Okay. So I know at least about 40% of the room are awake. The other 60%, I think, are either asleep or they haven't heard of Windows Server Core. Windows Server Core really came from our realization a couple of years ago that we had customers that were in production that had to do things like cycle their servers because of a vulnerability that came up on Media Player. Media Player, great piece of software, but unfortunately there were vulnerabilities that came up a couple of years ago and they weren't really a valid case for a server piece of software. So we started looking at the dependencies in different parts of the system and removing things out of different parts of the system and going and saying, well, why do we need to have a shell there? Why do we need to have anything there? Why do we need to have any of the administration tools installed by default? How small can we make this system? What are the other things that come along? So as an installation option on Windows Server 2008, you get the choice of being able to install either Server Core or Full Server. And Server Core, after you go through the install and you sign in, you're going to see a command prompt. It's taken it back to the 70s, there are no extra binaries loaded on that system unless they're needed. And really that's sort of the core thing. If you want to go and install a DNS server in there, you've got to go and run the command prompt to be able to go and do that. Now, after that, it's going to be Plum, so you can go and do centralized management of that. No management of that thing is going to be done locally on the system. Because, I figure that most servers are running in a darkened room and the administrator guy's sitting either half a continent away or a couple of hallways away, and they don't really need to be able to go and do anything local on that system. So there's no local admin tools, and all administration is done remotely. Now, we have in Windows Server 2008, we have integrated PowerShell. For any Windows administrator, I would suggest to you that you check out PowerShell because it's going to change your life. And I'm kind of serious there. Obviously, there's the other question of what are the attack vectors that come up from installing such a powerful scripting engine in the base level of the server. But, on Server Core, you can run anything that's a non-managed code script. So IIS, all the IIS, we have a version of that runs on Server Core. All the things that run in there are just WMI scripts, and they are a lowered attack surface. The big reasons that we had, as I said before, is to reduce the attack surface and really be able to sort of nullify the possibility that a vulnerability in some piece of software that frankly we don't care about on the server could be installed later. Now, having said that, on the server we do the same thing. On the full server where you have the UI, we do the same thing. There are some times where you might want to have some more desktop things. If you've got say a terminal server case, you want to be able to go and provide more of a desktop experience there. We have this extra thing you can install, the Desktop Experience Pack, which brings a bunch more of those, more client-y sort of things in there. And so you get people like me who run server on my laptop. I've got all that extra stuff installed in there as well. There's a limited number of roles that get installed on Server Core, mainly because of dependencies. The hard thing when you're running any piece of software, any software project, is working out what your dependencies, keeping track of it. Frankly, my suggestion to anybody starting up a software project, always be aware of your dependencies, always be aware of the things that are going to affect your build every day, the things that are going to stop you being able to go and change one piece of software because something underneath it's going to do. And we have a set of roles that will run on that. They all have to be installed by default, all the way from, basic things like file and print, Active Directory, all the way to virtualization. Now, there are some optional components that can be installed in this because sometimes you want to go and get some of the extra stuff. For example, clustering. You know, people want to be able to go and set up their systems clustered depending on what the role is there, and they want to be able to go and do it. Or things like multipath IO or BitLocker. And the sort of case that where BitLocker gets interesting is that, you know, we've got customers. Actually, I spoke to this bank a couple of weeks ago who told me that in the last year they've lost 3 servers from branches, which is kind of the most astounding thing I've ever heard. If you're going to rob a bank, you may as well steal the money, not the server. But people have been stealing the servers from this one bank. And, you know, if they go and do that if they go and do a snatch and grab on the hardware, where BitLocker's turned on in this case, if this is the server that's running in-premise in the branch, it's a brick. It's nothing that's useful, or the drives are nothing that's useful, and the drives are the most interesting place to hold things. We've also got a base set of functions that are turned on. You know, as I kept on saying, we're going to do the outer protection, we're going to have the firewall. Now, the cool thing is, as well, that we go and do things like the management systems that we have, things like System Center, to be able to go and provide management of a whole bunch of machines together, can actually manage that firewall centrally. So they can go and change the setting across all the firewalls of systems if they want to go and do that. I'm always suggesting to customers that are looking at that sort of stuff to tread lightly. Personally, I actually believe that within about 4 or 5 years, the predominant production version of Windows Server is going to be the server core version or installation option. I believe that's going to be a flip that happens within 5 years, because it's kind of a no-brainer. It looks exactly the same, it looks, smells, tastes exactly the same as every other server that you might have in production. It's just got a smaller attack surface, and you got to worry about less things. So, and you know, we will, if my bribery, especially tonight, actually happens with MSRC, you know, we will name that that when we're releasing an announcement of a vulnerability, we'll say it's not valid for server core systems. So, you know, a year's time, hopefully we can come back and say there isn't anything there. I don't think I want to be the person who actually ever promised that, but that's definitely one of the sort of focus areas that we want to be able to go and do. So, in my last 5 minutes, what have we got to go and do between now and the release of the thing? We have a bunch of people running in production. We work with a bunch of customers who do part of a thing called the Technology Adoption Program, who run systems in production before we release. We also do that with the Microsoft infrastructure. The Microsoft infrastructure is pretty interesting. The other customers' infrastructure to me is actually the most interesting, because, you know, we can kind of get our guys to do what we say, but they're going to have to see, the customer's going to have to see some real value that's going in there. All of Microsoft.com, if you go up to Netcraft and have a look at www.microsoft.com, you'll see that it's all running on Windows Server 2008 and IS7 today. There are around 3,000 sites, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, running in production on the net today. That's actually from the Netcraft statement that they made at the end of June was about 2,800. We think it's a little higher now. So I'm lowballing with 3,000. Don't hold me to it. Netcraft are the people that make the real statements of the number of things. And we're continuing on. And we've got a pretty known end game that we do for server. Windows Server 2003, I believe, was the model for us to go and learn how to do an end game of a product. You know, some of the parts of that system. IS6 has had, I think, 2 moderate vulnerabilities since its release. It's had one, SMTP and ASP.NET. Yeah, right. It's turned off, but there are some moderate vulnerabilities that have come up that were turned off by default, but, you know, that could be valid on there. But really, IIS has had no vulnerabilities in the 4 years since we've released IS6. So we really think we've made a lot of ground there, and we've made a lot of ground, especially compared to the previous version. And we continue to do that, and we continue to model off the things that we have done successfully in the past. We do have another round of pen tests. We have another set of things. We have a continuing set of things. Chris is sitting there, and he knows how much I love writing checks for him to go and do things. But we have a continuation of a bunch of stuff that's going on. So far, we've seen that, you know, the web server, file print, network protection, or what we call NAP, which is, the protection service or the policy enforcement service, and terminal server. They're the ones that have been most installed in our betas, and we've had a bunch of stuff going on. We've got thousands of servers sitting out there in production. We're trying to find ways. We're working with our customers to find out when every time one of them burps or farts, what it does and what's going on. And that's a sort of continuation of our process to be able to go and find things out. The final thing I'll actually talk about is we believe that the world has got to move to 64-bit computing. Okay, not just because of things like, lower level protection of the system to be able to go and say that you're not going to go and randomly have some way of someone putting something on a system that you have no way of being able to turn off. But we really think that we're seeing a lot of people who are running x86 on x64 systems, which I think is akin to running a sort of, having a V8 car and only having 4 cylinders running. We're really working on that. If any of you guys are driver vendors making software on top of that, there are a lot more reasons that we have for you to be able to go and move to. And so, if you're at WinEck, you understand this. There are a lot more reasons that we have for you to be able to go and move up to the x64 or 64-bit platforms. And we'll continue to do a huge investment. In fact, this is the last release we do of a 32-bit server operating system. I got misquoted a couple of months ago. It made huge press. Well, I didn't really make huge press. It made press in like 2 or 3 places that were a little bit better than blogs, but this was the last 32-bit operating system all the way across. I speak for server, not for client. But on the server side, we've announced in 2005, this release is our last 32-bit one. It's all 64-bit from here on, which means that we'll do both x64 and IA64 continuing out there. We know that people are running x64 in production. The numbers are lower than we'd like, which is kind of weird because you can't buy an x86 server anymore. So, we want everybody to go and run at that. All right, I'm over. David LeBlanc is going to come up and talk next. My name's Ian McDonald. My email address is ian.mcdonald@Microsoft. If you want to send me questions, I'm quite happy to answer them. I may copy in one of our security folks if it's relevant or whatever. Check out our system. Try and bust it. I'll be real interested to hear if you busted us. Thanks very much.